Poor student married 71-year-old billionaire. Amber in her designer wedding dress, hands shaking as she slips poison into champagne. The liquid substance dissolved instantly into champagne, invisible as a secret. Amber's hand steadied as she approached her new husband, the man who had orchestrated her father's downfall with the same cold precision he'd used to build his empire. Walter had no idea he was marrying the daughter of the man he'd killed. What would you do if someone destroyed your family? Let me know in the comments below. Have you ever felt so wrong that you'd risk everything for justice? What if I told you that somewhere right now, a beautiful bride is about to poison her husband on their wedding day? Meet Amber Collins, 30 years old, standing in a marble bathroom wearing a $10,000 wedding gown. Her hands tremble as she measures drops of clear liquid from a tiny vial into a crystal champagne flute. This isn't wedding day nerves. This is calculated murder. The reflection staring back at her show's designer makeup, perfect hair, and dead eyes. 23 years of planning have led to this moment. Walter Grantham, her soon-to-be husband, sits downstairs in his wheelchair, greeting guests worth billions of dollars. At 71, he's built a pharmaceutical empire that spans continents. He's also the man who destroyed her family. The wedding march begins. Amber takes one last look at the emerald pendant around her neck, her father's final gift before his death. She walks down the aisle with practiced grace, every step bringing her closer to revenge. The guests see a radiant bride marrying for love. They have no idea they're witnessing the opening act of a murder plot decades in the making. Do you, Amber, take Walter to be your husband? I do, she whispers, her voice steady despite the poison burning a hole in her purse. Walter's weathered hands shake slightly as he slips the wedding ring on her finger. His pale blue eyes show genuine affection, maybe even love. For a split second, Amber almost hesitates. Then she remembers finding her father hanging in their garage when she was 7 years old, and her resolve hardens like steel. The reception is elegant, expensive, everything Walter's money can buy. Amber plays her role perfectly, the grateful scholarship student who caught the eye of a billionaire. She laughs at his jokes, accepts congratulations from strangers, and waits for the right moment. It comes during the toast. Walter raises his champagne glass, the same one Amber prepared in the bathroom. The crowd falls silent as he begins to speak about new beginnings and unexpected love. Amber watches him lift the glass to his lips, her heart pounding so loud she's certain everyone can hear it. He drinks deeply. Walter had no idea he was marrying the daughter of the man he'd killed. What would you do if someone destroyed your family? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this story is just getting started. And if you think you know where this is heading, trust me, you have no idea what's coming next. To understand why Amber Collins became a killer, you need to meet the man she married and the empire built on stolen dreams. Walter Grantham didn't start as a monster. 40 years ago, he was a young pharmaceutical researcher working alongside his best friend from college, Marcus Thornfield. They were both brilliant, both driven, both determined to change the world through medicine. Marcus had developed revolutionary pain management patents that would help millions of patients suffering from chronic conditions. They trusted each other completely. That trust would prove fatal. Walter didn't just steal Marcus's life work. He systematically destroyed him. Corporate lawyers forged documents, making Walter the sole patent holder. Financial records were altered. Research data was transferred to Walter's private servers in the middle of the night. When Marcus tried to fight back, Walter's hired guns went to work. They spread rumors about Marcus's mental health. They sabotaged his presentations to potential investors. They froze his bank accounts through legal technicalities that would take years to resolve. But Marcus was stubborn, and he kept digging, kept fighting for his stolen patents. That's when Walter made the call that changed everything. Marcus Thornfield didn't kill himself in that garage 23 years ago. He was murdered by professional assassins who made it look like suicide. The police report was falsified, bought and paid for by Walter's dirty money. A brilliant scientist who could have saved countless lives was eliminated because he threatened Walter's empire. But Walter's crimes went deeper than murder. His pharmaceutical company had been testing experimental drugs on patients in developing countries. People too poor to fight back, too desperate to refuse treatment. When these illegal trials went wrong, Walter buried the evidence and silenced the victims' families with cash payments. Marcus discovered the truth about these human experiments. He was planning to expose everything when he died. The 7-year-old girl who found her father's body grew up believing he took his own life. She spent decades thinking her brilliant, loving father was weak enough to abandon her. Walter Grantham stole patents, stole lives, and stole a daughter's faith in her father's memory. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Share your story below, because betrayal like this leaves scars that never heal. For 23 years, Amber Thornfield lived with a lie. She believed her father was a coward who chose death over fighting for his work. She had no idea he was a murdered hero. The day after Marcus's funeral, 7-year-old Amber made a promise at his grave. She would restore his stolen legacy, no matter what it took. That promise shaped every decision for the next 2 decades. She changed her last name to Collins and buried her true identity. The brilliant child threw herself into academics with frightening intensity. While other kids played video games, Amber studied chemistry textbooks. While teenagers went to parties, she perfected her understanding of molecular biology. Harvard accepted her on a full scholarship, drawn by test scores that bordered on impossible. Her professors called her gifted. Her classmates called her obsessed. They had no idea she was training to become an assassin. Amber earned dual degrees in chemistry and biochemistry, specializing in neurotoxins and their effects on the human nervous system. Her thesis advisor praised her groundbreaking research on synthetic compounds that could mimic neurological diseases. The academic world saw a rising star in pharmaceutical research. What they didn't see was a woman learning to kill with scientific precision. Every chemical formula she mastered brought her closer to Walter Grantham. Every late night in the university lab was practice for the day. She would measure poison into his drink. She became expert at synthesizing compounds that would be undetectable in standard medical tests. The scholarship student persona was perfect camouflage. Designer clothes bought with student loan money, just expensive enough to catch Walter's eye at charity galas. Amber played the role of grateful, naive young woman dazzled by wealth and power. Walter never suspected the beautiful girl hanging on his every word was studying him like a laboratory specimen. She learned his routines, his medical history, his medications. She memorized the names of his doctors and the security codes to his private residences. For 3 years, Amber Collins courted a billionaire while Amber Thornfield planned his destruction. The emerald pendant she never removed was her father's last gift, worn on the day he died. Every time Walter complimented it, she smiled sweetly while calculating the exact dosage needed to make him suffer. She signed a marriage certificate with practice deception, but this wasn't her first false identity. 3 days after the wedding, Walter Grantham's empire began to crumble from within, starting with his own body. It started with small tremors in his hands during morning coffee. Walter dismissed them as stress from the wedding excitement. By afternoon, his speech began slurring slightly during phone conferences with international investors. His personal physician recommended rest and attributed the symptoms to exhaustion. Amber played the concerned wife perfectly. She scheduled medical appointments, researched specialists, and held his trembling hands with fabricated tenderness. Every worried expression was carefully calculated, every gentle touch hiding deadly knowledge. The neurotoxin she'd synthesized was a masterpiece of biochemical engineering. It attacked the nervous system gradually, mimicking the progression of Parkinson's disease while remaining completely invisible to standard blood tests. Even the most sophisticated medical equipment couldn't detect her custom-designed poison. Within a week, Walter could barely sign his own name. The hands that had once wielded enough power to destroy lives now shook uncontrollably, reaching for a glass of water. His brilliant mind, still sharp and aware, was trapped inside a body that no longer obeyed his commands. This was exactly what Amber wanted. The same helplessness her father experienced in his final months. Marcus Thornfield had spent his last year in a wheelchair, bankrupted by legal fees and broken by betrayal. He needed help eating, help bathing, help with everything that once came naturally. Walter was now living that same nightmare, except his suffering was artificially induced by his victim's daughter. The irony was delicious. The pharmaceutical king defeated by chemistry. Amber increased the dosage carefully, monitoring Walter's decline with scientific precision. She installed hidden cameras throughout their mansion, recording every moment of his deterioration. Not for evidence, for satisfaction. She wanted to document his complete humiliation. The billionaire who once commanded boardrooms now needed assistance standing up from his wheelchair. The man who'd built an empire through ruthless calculation couldn't calculate simple math problems. His slurred speech made him sound drunk during video conferences, embarrassing him in front of business partners who'd respected him for decades. Medical specialists were baffled. Neurologists ran test after test, finding nothing conclusive. Walter's condition was progressing too rapidly for natural disease, but the symptoms were too consistent for most known toxins. Amber watched them struggle with fake concern, knowing they would never identify her synthetic compound. The cruel parallel wasn't lost on her. Father and tormentor, both reduced to shadows of their former selves. Do you think Walter deserves what's happening to him? Is this justice for Marcus Thornfield's murder? Or has Amber become a monster she's fighting against? Leave your thoughts below, because someone is about to arrive who will change everything. Dr. Ethan Mercer stepped out of his black Mercedes at exactly 3:47 p.m., 18 hours after receiving the most disturbing phone call of his career. Walter Grantham's personal attorney had been brief but alarming. His grandfather was dying of an unknown neurological condition, and the family needed his expertise immediately. The 34-year-old neurologist had spent the last decade in Geneva, specializing in rare brain disorders that baffled other doctors. His reputation for solving medical mysteries had made him the go-to consultant for cases that seemed impossible. But this case was personal. Ethan hadn't spoken to Walter in 5 years, not since their explosive argument about the pharmaceutical industry's ethics. The brilliant doctor had accused his grandfather of prioritizing profits over patients. Walter had accused him of being naive about business realities. They'd parted ways with harsh words and wounded pride. Now, walking through the marble corridors of Grantham Manor, Ethan felt the familiar weight of family obligation mixed with professional curiosity. Something about this emergency felt wrong from the moment he'd answered that phone call. The young woman who greeted him at Walter's bedroom door was stunning in that calculated way that immediately raised his suspicions. Designer clothes, perfect makeup, and eyes that seemed to catalog his every movement. She introduced herself as Amber, Walter's new wife, with just the right mixture of grief and relief at his arrival. "Thank God you're here," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "The doctors can't figure out what's wrong with him. It started right after our wedding." Ethan's trained eye caught the inconsistencies immediately. The expensive dress that contradicted her claims of modest background. The way her fingers instinctively moved to an emerald pendant when she spoke, as if drawing strength from it. Most telling was the brief flicker of calculation behind her tears before she settled back into the role of devoted wife. But it was Walter's condition that truly alarmed him. The specific combination of symptoms, tremors, slurred speech, cognitive decline, followed a pattern that didn't match any natural disease progression. In 15 years of medical practice, Ethan had learned to trust his instincts when something felt artificially induced. "Has he been taking any new medications?" Ethan asked, watching Amber's reaction carefully. Her pause lasted exactly 2 seconds too long. Just his usual prescriptions. Nothing has changed. That's when everything shifted, because Ethan wasn't just any doctor. 48 hours of investigation revealed what Amber thought she'd hidden perfectly. Ethan didn't just examine his grandfather. He dissected every aspect of the medical mystery with the precision of a detective. He ran specialized blood tests that standard physicians wouldn't think to order. He analyzed tissue samples under equipment most hospitals couldn't afford. He used his connections in the research community to test for compounds that existed only in advanced university laboratories. The breakthrough came when he discovered the surveillance cameras. During a routine examination, Ethan's sharp eyes caught the subtle glint of a lens positioned behind the mahogany bookshelf. A thorough search revealed a sophisticated recording system that would make professional filmmakers jealous. But it was the footage from the past 2 weeks that confirmed his darkest suspicions. There, in crystal clear high definition, was Amber methodically administering unlabeled injections to Walter. The syringes contained a clear liquid she handled with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with its properties. More damning still was her expression during these moments. The cold, analytical look of a scientist monitoring a successful experiment. The next morning, Ethan entered Walter's room carrying a tablet loaded with incriminating evidence. Amber looked up from her position beside the bed, her practiced smile faltering as she recognized the look in his eyes. "Fascinating work," he said quietly, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "The neurotoxin you've been administering shows remarkable sophistication. It's a synthetic compound designed to mimic Parkinson's symptoms while avoiding detection in conventional blood tests." Amber's mask slipped for just a moment before she recovered. "I don't understand what you're suggesting." "Dr. Amber Thornfield," Ethan continued, watching her flinch at the name. "Daughter of Marcus Thornfield, Harvard graduate with dual degrees in chemistry and biochemistry. Your thesis on synthetic neurotoxins was particularly impressive and highly relevant to your current hobby." The room fell silent except for Walter's labored breathing. Amber's hand moved instinctively to her emerald pendant, and for the first time in decades, her carefully constructed facade cracked completely. "He destroyed my father," she whispered, her voice raw with suppressed pain. Marcus Thornfield wasn't just Walter's business partner. He was his best friend. They built their dreams together, and Walter took everything. She pulled out a worn photograph from her purse, a young man with gentle eyes holding a 7-year-old girl on his shoulders. "My father was a genius. His pharmaceutical patents would have revolutionized pain management for millions. But Walter didn't just steal his work. He systematically destroyed his reputation, his relationships, his will to live." Ethan watched emotions flicker across her face like storm clouds. "So you decided to make him suffer the same way." "I wanted him to understand helplessness," Amber replied, tears cutting tracks through her makeup. "I wanted him to know what it felt like to have your body betray you, to be dependent on others for everything. My father spent his last months in a wheelchair, bankrupted and broken, before he couldn't take the pain anymore." The truth was finally coming to light, but the biggest revelation was still to come. What happened next shocked everyone in the room, including Walter himself. The old man's eyes, clouded with neurotoxin for weeks, suddenly focused with startling clarity. His voice, though weak, carried the weight of decades of buried guilt. The words that came out of his mouth would rewrite everything Amber thought she knew about her father's death. "Marcus didn't kill himself," Walter whispered, each word hitting the room like a physical blow. Amber stared at him in disbelief, her world tilting off its axis. "What are you talking about?" Walter's trembling hand reached for a hidden panel in his bedside table, revealing documents and photographs that had been concealed for over 20 years. The police report was falsified. Marcus was murdered because he was going to expose not just my corporate theft, but something much worse. The revelation that followed changed everything. Walter had been running illegal pharmaceutical trials, using patients in developing countries as unwitting test subjects for experimental drugs. These weren't standard clinical trials with proper oversight. They were human experiments conducted on the poorest, most vulnerable populations. Marcus had discovered the truth by accident while reviewing financial records. He'd found payments to overseas clinics, coded medical reports, and death certificates that didn't match official records. Dozens of patients had died from Walter's experimental treatments, their deaths covered up with bribes and falsified paperwork. Marcus was going to expose everything. Walter continued, his voice breaking with decades of suppressed guilt. He had copies of the trial data, recordings of my conversations with the clinic directors, financial records proving the bribes. He was planning to contact journalists, medical boards, international oversight committees. The hired assassins had made it look perfect. A depressed scientist, bankrupt from legal battles, hanging himself in his garage. The local police, already paid off, ruled it suicide without investigating further. Marcus's evidence disappeared from his home office before his body was discovered. "I've been living with this guilt for 23 years, Walter whispered. "I destroyed the life of the only person who ever truly understood me. And then I covered up his murder to protect myself. Every success, every dollar, every moment of power was built on his blood." Amber felt her world collapse. Her father hadn't been weak. He'd been a hero trying to save lives. He hadn't abandoned her. He'd been murdered for doing what was right. The man she'd been slowly killing had been carrying the weight of this secret for decades. But Walter had one final surprise. Hidden among his documents was a complete confession, written years ago but never delivered. Along with it was evidence of the murder. Recorded conversations with the assassins, financial records of the payments, and copies of the medical data that Marcus had died trying to expose. "I've been waiting for someone to find this," Walter said, his voice gaining strength despite his physical weakness. "I've been waiting for the courage to make things right. Maybe it took nearly dying to finally find it." Justice was about to be served, but not in the way anyone expected. The months that followed rewrote the Grantham legacy forever. Walter's confession triggered the largest pharmaceutical industry investigation in decades. Federal agents raided Grantham Industries, seizing decades of hidden records. The evidence Walter had preserved led to arrests across 3 continents. Executives, clinic directors, government officials who'd enabled the human experiments. The empire built on stolen patents and murder crumbled within weeks. Walter's fortune, estimated at $12 billion, was liquidated to compensate victims' families and fund medical research foundations. The patents stolen from Marcus Thornfield were returned to his estate, ensuring his revolutionary work would finally help the patients he'd dreamed of healing. Amber was arrested for attempted murder, but received a reduced sentence in exchange for her testimony. 5 years in prison seemed insignificant compared to the justice finally served for her father. More importantly, Marcus Thornfield's name was cleared. The world learned he wasn't a suicide. He was a murdered hero who died fighting for vulnerable patients. Walter lived just long enough to see his confession make headlines worldwide. As the neurotoxin's effects gradually wore off, his body healed, but his spirit found peace in truth. He died quietly in a hospital bed, surrounded not by family or friends, but by the knowledge that his final act had meaning. The emerald pendant that Amber had worn throughout her deception was returned to her father's grave, where it belonged. The headstone now bore the truth. Marcus Thornfield, beloved father, murdered hero. Autumn leaves fell around the marble as Amber visited for the last time before prison. Standing there, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 23 years: peace. Her father's legacy was restored. His killers faced justice. His stolen work would save lives. The daughter who'd sought revenge had found something better: redemption for the father she'd never stopped loving. In Amber's position, would you have chosen revenge or justice? Was Walter's final confession enough to redeem decades of evil? Share your thoughts below, and if this story moved you, please share it with someone who believes in the power of truth.